The short-term, mid-term, and long-term prospects for Great Britain seem dim. Is so much of this going to be just sort of like, how do we unwind this relationship?
Let's go back to something you said, Sam, right? Because this is the one hope that we've got, and I'm not that hopeful. Now, I'm against the euro. I'm a strong critic of the euro. I don't think it should have been introduced. I think it maybe fits one or two countries, but Europe itself has its own problems. But we're not talking about Europe. We're talking about the UK. The UK didn't have to do any of this and is now going to negotiate a situation that's going to be worse than the one it found in, and it's going to cause ructions economically and politically, globally and locally because of this. So it's completely unnecessary. Now, what is Cameron doing by pushing this out to, it was October, it is now September? He's trying to induce as much buyer's remorse as possible into everybody who voted to leave. Now, at the end of the day, here's a weird thing about Britain. It doesn't have a written constitution. This is very important. Now, because it doesn't have a written constitution, parliamentary sovereignty is the only rule that matters. If Parliament doesn't vote on it, it doesn't happen. Nigel Farage, one of the main leaders of Get Out, doesn't have a seat in Parliament. And the main parties, even though they're basically collapsing and infighting at this point, have to actually vote on this to get it done. There is no executive authority like there is in the United States where the president writes an executive order and X happens. So Cameron's not going to press the button for Article 50. There's going to be elections. They're going to build up as much buyer's remorse as possible, and they're going to try and overturn this. This is what the internal game, I think, is. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, right? If you do that, the 51% who voted to get out will go nuts because they will see this as hijacking a vote. But that vote was merely advisory. There is no such thing as a legally binding referendum in the United Kingdom. Parliamentary sovereignty is the only thing that matters. So on the one hand, you could do this, but the ructions will be huge. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If you do that, if you say, okay, we're going to go with this, as Cameron says he's doing at least, we're going to respect the 51% who voted to get out, what about the 61% in Scotland who said we'd like to stay in?
Right.
What about Northern Ireland? Because this is where this gets really interesting, because if so Northern Ireland leaves and Scotland leaves, where do you put the nuclear weapons? What happens to NATO's commitment from Britain? What happens to Britain's G7 position? It dies. What happens to its UN Security Council seat? It goes into question. So for all the things that people are worried about in terms of getting back sovereignty from Europe, yeah, good luck with that. You've made Great Britain so much less great.
And so theoretically, what could happen in Parliament is that everybody just keeps pointing to other people. I mean, it just sort of feels like everybody's just going to take an extended vacation and wait until hopefully nobody remembers that they were supposed to vote on this article to initiate the actual exit. Because I mean, the distinct feeling I get is that everybody was just sort of bluffing. And, like all of them were all just sort of bluffing. Nobody thought this was actually going to happen because they don't seem, from Boris Johnson on down, none of them seem to really know what they're supposed to do next.
There's no plan. You're absolutely right. But, this is why people should be incredibly worried about Trump. It's the same thing. You can have this spasm of rejection of the liberal and conservative elites, and God knows it's justified. But what happens when you put that guy in charge? And it's the same thing with Boris Johnson. All he wanted to do was dethrone his old buddy Cameron as if it was a debating society match and get control of the Tory party, instead of which he's put Britain on the brink of an economic and political disaster for nothing more than personal envy, ambition, and just being, how can I put this politely, and just being Boris.
Hello, you. I'm Sam Seder. Looking for smart progressive talk that is occasionally amusing? Well, subscribe to our YouTube feed. Subscribe to our podcast. Like us on Facebook. And just generally enjoy us.